Tonight on Ukraine Today, enemy losses, what's happening on the battlefield, and is Russia finally running out of troops and equipment? Replenishing the missile arsenal, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense unveiled a new, previously unseen version of the Neptune cruise missile. Indian-Russian military drills, they're taking place amid growing tensions between New Delhi and Washington. Russian Propaganda Digest, a fresh selection of nonsense pouring into eyes and ears of ordinary Russians. All that and more right now. Hi, I'm Volodymyr Lopchun. Please make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and let's get to the news. Let's start with enemy losses. In the past 24 hours, at least 1,010 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, that makes over 1,118,000 enemy troops. In addition, over the past day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 5 armored vehicles, 26 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of enemy equipment. In temporarily occupied Crimea, the Feodosia oil terminal has been burning for the 3rd day in a row. It's the largest terminal on the peninsula, handling up to 12 million tons of oil products each year and capable of storing 250,000 tons of fuel and lubricants. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense has unveiled a new, previously unseen version of the Neptune cruise missile. Its technical specs remain undisclosed, but the design shows visible differences, including 2-side bulges that could perhaps be additional fuel tanks. Either way, this signals a potential boost in Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities. Combined with support from Western partners, it could become a serious factor in countering Russian aggression. Here's what President Zelensky said about this issue in his evening address.
Since the beginning of this war, the world has gone through a major evolution in its attitude toward the Russian state, its potential, and its real capabilities. There was a time when people were afraid of how Russia might react, and a lot was lost because of that. Time was lost. Opportunities were lost by some of our partners. Ukraine has always called for greater determination. And now everyone can see that this is exactly what works with Russia: Iran pressure, sanctions, and sufficient long-range capabilities. A fair, justified long-range response to all Russian strikes on our energy sector, our cities, our people. Russian oil refineries feel it. Russian military plants feel it. Russian logistics feel it. Forcing Russia into peace, that is what has to work.
Estonia's Milrem Robotics, in cooperation with the Netherlands, will provide Ukraine with over 150 ground drones. Multi-purpose robotic platforms that can serve for transport, evacuation, reconnaissance, or even combat. France and Ukraine are also deepening their military cooperation. What weapons could arrive from Paris, and what might Ukraine offer in return? Find out in our story.
Strong support for Ukraine. Military and financial assistance from the very beginning of the full-scale war.
And from the very first day, we made a strong choice to support Ukraine in the face of Russia's aggressive war, and at the same time, to support its independence and freedom.
Even despite political instability in the country, France has stated that this will not affect its military support for Ukraine, and Macron himself has called for increasing aid and strengthening sanctions against Russia.
France plays a truly key role in the established system of collective security in Europe. Accordingly, France, as a country that genuinely aspires to regional leadership on the European continent, consistently demonstrates its activity on the foreign policy stage not just through mere statements. France provides Ukraine with practical military technical assistance. It should be noted that France's military technical assistance has already reached about 6 billion euros.
France was also one of the first countries to begin supplying Ukraine with important weaponry.
France is one of the first countries to have provided Ukraine with long-range strike capabilities. Moreover, France was among the first countries to allow the use of its cruise missiles for strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation. This is quite remarkable. In other words, France demonstrates its support for Ukraine through practical action. Once again, this highlights the difference from other European and global partners.
During the meeting between Zelensky and Macron, they discussed strengthening Ukraine's air defense ahead of winter, as well as the use of frozen Russian assets for the benefit of Ukraine.
France has also supplied Ukraine with strike capabilities We're talking about self-propelled artillery systems produced in France, the Caesar self-propelled howitzers. In addition, the French side officially announced its firm commitment that it would further strengthen and significantly enhance the defensive capabilities of Ukraine's crucial air defense system, providing essential support. And this is quite remarkable.
Moreover, thanks to France, Ukraine has something even better than the American Patriot system.
France, together with Italy, has supplied SAMP T surface-to-air missile systems, Franco-Italian-made, for the needs of the Ukrainian armed forces. This is essentially the equivalent of the American Patriot system. And in certain aspects, it even surpasses the Patriot.
As for the French Mirage 2000 fighter jets, it is known that their number in the French Air Force has decreased. This means that several units of this aircraft have indeed been transferred to Ukraine.
The number of aircraft delivered is up to about 10 units. But the most remarkable thing is that Ukrainian pilots have undergone training courses on French territory, and not only on the Mirage 2000 F-5, which is the main combat aircraft of the French Air Force, but also accordingly on the F-16.
And we should not forget about the possibility of training Ukrainian military personnel, which France is also actively conducting.
It was on French territory, specifically within its borders, that the Anna of Kiev Brigade, a significant military unit, underwent its comprehensive and rigorous training program. In addition to this, Ukrainian pilots and electronic warfare specialists, along with air defense specialists, are also currently undergoing their essential and advanced training in France, receiving vital instruction and practical experience.
Our experience in your industry. Ukraine and France have agreed to launch joint weapons production. This concerns UAVs and defense manufacturing.
First and foremost, this refers to both strike drones and interceptor drones. So, as we can see in this regard, France is also supporting the Ukrainian side in the development of our military-industrial complex.
Here is the first joint drone from a French company and the Ukrainian Antonov aircraft plant, who announced their cooperation 2 years ago. The Arok has completed its first fighter flight with a pilot. Arok is capable of carrying out long-range patrol and reconnaissance missions, as well as delivering effective strikes, including against small enemy aircraft of that type.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And now is the perfect time to subscribe and give this video a like. And please share it so more people can see it. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine. Ukraine's air defense forces intercepted 154 out of 183 drones launched by Putin's army overnight. Unfortunately, 22 UAVs hit targets in 11 locations, including power infrastructure in Chernihiv and Dnipropetrovsk regions. 2 energy workers were injured. In the Chernihiv region, Russian forces also hit a freight train with 12 Shahed drones, damaging railway tracks. And in another strike, a Ukrainian hummus factory was destroyed by a Russian missile. Once again, the terrorists hit a civilian target, but thankfully no one was injured. Ending the war between Russia and Ukraine would be harder than resolving the conflict in the Middle East. That's according to the US President Donald Trump, speaking during a meeting with Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House.
Things are happening with respect to Russia, Ukraine. That's one that last week, Mark, 7,812 people were killed. Soldiers, mostly soldiers. But 7,000, more than 7,000, almost 8,000 soldiers were killed. It's a crazy thing. I thought that would have been one of the easy ones. I get along very well with Putin, and I thought that would have been, I'm very disappointed in him, because I thought this would have been an easy one to settle, but it's turned out to be maybe tougher than the Middle East.
Actually, we can highlight Trump's disappointment in Putin and add it to his comments about supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Earlier this week, the US president said he had sort of already made that decision. How could Tomahawks affect Russia's war on Ukraine? That's next.
U.S. President Donald Trump has almost made a decision to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles.
Yes, I've almost made up my mind already, if you think about it. Yes, I think I want to know what they're doing with them, where they're sending them. I think I'll have to ask that question
At the end of last week, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin stated that the supply of American long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine would lead to an entirely new level of escalation, particularly in relations between Moscow and Washington. Putin called the missiles not exactly modern and noted that providing these missiles to Ukraine would not change the balance of power on the battlefield.
As for whether or not there will be Tomahawks, I have to say that I'm still not 100% sure. For now, it seems to me that it's more likely no than yes. But the very fact that not only have Trump's words changed, but also that there are now reports in the information space that the US is considering a much wider range of weapons that they could sell to their European partners for Ukraine, this really does change the rules of the game. And this is yet another form of pressure, primarily on Putin's inner circle, because they are being made to clearly understand that if they were hoping a change of power in the US would bring them victory, that same change of power in the US could bring Ukraine Tomahawks, which would come for them.
The saga of transferring the missiles could drag on for several months. This was written by Yehor Chernev, the head of the permanent delegation of the Verkhovna Rada to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Because, first and foremost, this is a means of pressuring Putin and an attempt to force him to negotiate, and only after that does it serve to strengthen our military capabilities. It is no coincidence that Trump said he has almost made up his mind, that he does not want escalation, and that he wants to clarify how these missiles will be used.
Chernev insists that the transfer of Tomahawks to Ukraine is a test for Putin and it may be carried out in stages. At each stage, Putin will be given the opportunity to back down and enter into negotiations. Therefore, most likely, the delivery and use of the missiles will be very gradual.
Tomahawks is a well-known term, and that's why we're discussing it. But it's reasonable to assume that there are other types of missiles that are unknown, which may very well be better than the Tomahawk. Tomahawks are not a new invention, they are fairly old missiles. But these newer missiles, whose names wouldn't mean anything to anyone, if Ukraine were to receive those as well, that would undoubtedly be a huge problem for Russia.
Putin's lies about negotiations could result in the transfer of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. This idea was expressed by former US Special Representative Kurt Volker. Volker believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin personally misled the American president. This refers to Putin's promise to Trump to hold negotiations with Zelensky, which Trump announced at the White House after his meeting with Putin in Alaska.
I think there are indications, and one of these indications, by the way, is the ongoing strikes on Russian oil refineries. Let me remind you, Trump's predecessor Biden, who supported Ukraine at the same time, said, no, let's not have you strike Russian oil refineries. Ukraine stopped doing that. Donald Trump does not support Ukraine in the same way. Moreover, let's remember, in the first half of the year, it was generally believed that he was actually expressing more pro-Russian rhetoric than pro-Ukrainian. Now he is changing his approach a bit, or maybe not just a bit, but even drastically. Nevertheless, as analysts again point out, there are no restrictions for Ukraine.
The Institute for the Study of War writes that if Ukraine is not given Tomahawks, around 2,000 Russian military and industrial targets could be at risk, from Shahids and Labuga to bombers in Engels.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
India and Russia have launched joint military drills Indra 2025 in Rajasthan, Reuters reports. Russia's so-called defense ministry says the exercises aim to improve anti-terror operations and exchange best practices. They'll continue until October 15th, another week. In my opinion, these drills shouldn't be seen as an isolated event. Together with growing economic cooperation between Moscow and New Delhi and rising tensions with Washington over Trump's tariff policy, the message to the West is clear. India doesn't care about US pressure, and Russia still has allies willing to help it continue or maybe even expand its war.
From fakes to provocations, Moscow is back to its old ways. A factory of lies, provocation, and intimidation. Rafia accelerates the phase of informational and psychological preparation, the so-called Phase Zero, in his company to prepare for a possible war with NATO.
Russia has entered the first phase of preparation, Phase Zero, to move to a higher level of war than the one in which Russia is currently engaged, for example, to a future NATO-Russia war. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War write,
In Susin 2025, Muscovy sharply intensified its operations. From the drone incursion into astronaut airspace to official statements by the Foreign Intelligence Service about alleged planned attacks in Europe. The latest accusation is against the United Kingdom. Allegedly, London is planning attacks by pro-Ukrainian Russians on military and civilian vessels.
The statement by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service on October 6 follows similar false statements by the SVR regarding European countries such as Poland, Moldova, and Serbia. And in the past week, the SVR has started making such statements more frequently, indicating a new pattern of coordinated actions. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War write,
These actions are not spontaneous. This is a carefully constructed strategy based on the experience of 2014 and 2022, when the Kremlin used disinformation as an artillery barrage before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the alliance is stepping up its monitoring of Russian information and psychological operations, recording a surge in activity from trolls and fake networks. The most noticeable campaigns are in Poland, Germany, Slovakia, and the Baltic countries. It is precisely there that Moscow is trying to provoke war fatigue and distrust in allied commitments. Under the guise of alternative opinions and anti-globalist movements, the Kremlin is building a network of loyal speakers, bloggers, and pseudo-experts. Their task is to implant the idea that NATO is supposedly provoking Russia, that the West is tired of Ukraine, and that a new war is inevitable. In addition, rumors about mobilization and threats of nuclear weapons use are being spread in Western countries. That
Putin is actively planning to go even further. He explicitly stated this back in December of 2021, that his overarching goal is not just Ukraine, but also the entirety of Eastern Europe and even the vast Arctic region.
This rhetoric is not just propaganda, but a tool of pressure. Moscow is testing the resilience of Western societies, the level of fear, and their readiness to respond. The louder the threat is discussed, the less people believe in it, and the easier it becomes to deliver a real blow, political, economic, or military.
Everything happening now is pressure on the European Union, on our European partners, to make President Zelensky compromise, to get him to agree to the terms of peace proposed by the Russian Federation, 2 of 4 regions, and so on. All these drones on the territory of the European Union and so on. These are provocations, yes, absolutely right. However, these actions represent deliberate and concerted attempts to exert significant diplomatic and economic pressure on various sovereign European countries, and indeed on the entire European Union as a collective entity, with the explicit intention that they too would become substantially more accommodating and flexible in their ongoing and complex relations with the powerful Russian Federation. After all, provocations from Russia have not stopped the flow of Russian liquefied gas, LNG, which is going to Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and Spain. None of these countries has ever said, "We are stopping the purchase of Russian gas," and this continues. That's why I don't believe in war.
For now, one thing is clear. The Kremlin is testing the waters, but no one knows what will happen tomorrow. These actions can easily turn into real strikes. And for now, this is not a direct attack. It is psychological preparation for one. Its goal is to destabilize the information space, to sow panic, distrust, and a sense of the inevitability of a new war. Right now, the future of the entire continent depends on the reaction of Western politicians.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says the extradition of a Ukrainian suspected in the Nord Stream sabotage is not in Poland's interests. He stressed that the problem isn't that Nord Stream 2 was blown up. The problem is that it was built at all. Russia, financed by some European countries, did it against Europe's core interests. Tusk added that the court will decide the suspect's fate, but his government's stance is clear. And finally, a Russian propaganda digest, a new dose of nonsense flooding into eyes and ears of ordinary Russians.
Everything new is just well-forgotten old. Apparently that's what the representatives of Russian propaganda thought, and they started claiming that cavalry could now ensure success on the front lines.
They used horses so that over these 15 kilometers, the so-called kill zone to cross, first of all, it takes incredible training to use a horse in the conditions that currently exist along the line of contact. These are combat operations, there are a huge number of explosions, and drones are being used everywhere.
Russian propagandists are promoting the idea of using hoofed animals on the front lines. Horses can easily escape from drones, cross kill zones, and even mines don't go off under them since the animals can sense them. What's the connection between metal and a horse?
Let me explain. So the mines don't go off, the ones that are triggered by metal. Near the line of contact, you cross those last, roughly speaking, 5 kilometers so that you can then dismount and start some kind of advance. And of course, with a horse, you can cover these distances. The fighter really won't get tired.
Cavalry is also being actively promoted on Russia today. According to war correspondent Pegov, assault troops are being trained in horseback riding. Horses are a game changer on the battlefield.
As is well known, horses are much more sensitive than people. Thanks to their natural instincts, a horse, for example, won't step on a magnetic mine with its hoof. In addition, it navigates perfectly and can see in the dark. A horse is able to cover the crucial stretches of ground from our positions to the enemy trenches faster than any other vehicle. The terrain in Donbas allows it to chart a direct route without any roads. So I'm confident that in the near future, we will witness the historic return of Russian cavalry to the ranks. Semyon Pegov, war correspondent, Russia Today.
And here is a recent video that shows just how effective the Russian cavalry is. I feel sorry for the horses, but as for the occupier, the chairwoman of the Federation Council, Valentina Matvienko, has proposed that unemployed Russians pay an annual so-called insurance fee of 45,000 rubles to the budget. She doesn't really care that in the great and mighty country there might simply be no jobs.
Pensioners, our children, they are sacred to us, the disabled, people with health limitations, no questions there. But when young, healthy people of working age are not working anywhere, first of all, that's shadow employment, or they simply don't want to work. Then the question is, what income or sources are they living on? I have a suggestion. Anton says a healthy person can pay 45,000 a year for this.
As they say, let's take the fight to the freeloaders. And if you have no money at all, you can sign a contract and go to the special military operation. There is no mobilization in the Russian Federation at all. Well, that's what they say on TV. But electronic draft notices are being sent out more and more often now.
Funny thing. Because my salary was delayed, I took out a microloan, clicked to consent to the processing of my personal data at 2:50, and at 2:52, I got a notification from the government services portal and a draft notice. Please, warn people in the channel that under no circumstances should conscripts fill out anything like this. It came literally right away.
And this isn't an isolated case. The human rights project I Dite Lesom reported a second such case in just 2 days.
I just checked my credit score on the Credit Historia website, where you have to log in through the government services portal. Then I applied for a loan at T-Bank, and then bam! A notification from Mosru. An electronic draft notice.
Issuing the identities of new conscripts. This has been confirmed, and it looks like this story will only keep spreading across Russia.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment and share. See you next time.